There is a chapter of human history that was not gently forgotten. It was erased, not by time alone, but by catastrophe, trauma, and the slow decay of memory. Tonight, we return to the dust of ancient Sumer to recover a story that humanity was never meant to fully remember. This is not myth in the modern sense. It is testimony. Long before the Bible was written, before Genesis, before Noah, scribes pressed a story into wet clay, using wedge-shaped symbols that would outlast empires. These tablets describe a king who lived close enough to the end of the world to speak with the only man who survived it. His name was Gilgamesh, and his journey was not one of conquest, but of terror. The terror of discovering that even kings must die. According to the oldest epic ever written, Gilgamesh ruled the city of Uruk at a time when gods still walked among humans, when civilization itself was young and fragile, and when the memory of a global flood had not yet faded into allegory. This flood was not symbolic. It was described as absolute annihilation, a deluge so violent that humanity was nearly erased, so complete that the survivors believed the gods themselves had panicked. The Epic of Gilgamesh does not begin as a spiritual text. It begins as a political and historical one. Because Gilgamesh was not just a literary invention, he appears on official king lists. He is named in temple construction records. His servants stamped their loyalty into clay seals. To the Sumerians, Gilgamesh was not legend. He was history. And yet, his story evolves into something far stranger than a royal chronicle. After the death of his closest companion, Gilgamesh becomes consumed by a single question, one that still haunts us today. If even the strongest must die, what hope does anyone have? This question drives him beyond the borders of the known world, beyond civilization, beyond reason. He seeks out the one man who escaped death itself, a flood survivor, a witness to planetary destruction. A man granted immortality by beings the Sumerians called the Anunnaki. These were not distant, benevolent gods. They were rulers, cosmic authorities who engineered humanity not out of compassion, but necessity. According to their own texts, humans were created to labor, to maintain the world the gods no longer wished to tend themselves. This is where myth darkens into something uncomfortable, because the Anunnaki did not describe themselves as creators of souls. They described themselves as managers of a workforce, and humanity as the solution to a labor problem. The epic does not hide this relationship. It normalizes it. Fear of divine punishment, obedience enforced by catastrophe, survival contingent on service, and looming behind all of it is the memory of a cosmic event so violent it reshaped the planet, a scar still visible today. Science now confirms that around 13,000 years ago, Earth was struck not by a single asteroid, but by a barrage of comet fragments that ignited continents, melted ice sheets, disrupted ocean currents, and plunged the world into a sudden, brutal cold age. This event, known as the Younger Dryas, coincides almost perfectly with the flood remembered in the epic. The question is no longer whether something happened. The question is, who remembered it, and why? This is not a story of imagination. It is the reconstruction of what survived. And to understand it, we must follow Gilgamesh, not as a hero, but as a man chasing immortality through the ruins of a broken world. In the next part, we will uncover the evidence that Gilgamesh was real, and why the city he ruled should not have existed when it did. To understand why the story of Gilgamesh is so unsettling, we must begin by establishing a simple but uncomfortable truth. Gilgamesh was not a myth invented to teach morals. He was treated as a historical king by the people who lived closest to his time. The strongest evidence comes from a document that reads less like legend and more like state propaganda, the Sumerian king list. This was not poetry. It was administration. Compiled and copied by scribes across centuries, the king list was designed to legitimize political power. Each new dynasty connected itself to a sacred chain of kingship, stretching back to the beginning of time. What makes the list disturbing is not what it excludes, but what it includes. Before a great flood, the list names kings who ruled for impossibly long spans of time, tens of thousands of years. Their reigns are so exaggerated they border on the absurd. But then something changes. After the flood, reign lengths collapse into reality. And in the very first post-flood dynasty of Uruk, a familiar name appears: Gilgamesh. According to the list, he ruled for 126 years, still extraordinary, but no longer impossible. More importantly, he is listed among kings whose existence is confirmed by archaeology. This places Gilgamesh in a transitional zone between myth and record, between godlike rulers and human ones. The list is quietly telling us something. The flood was a dividing line. Everything before it belonged to a different world. Additional confirmation comes from a far less poetic source, the Tamil inscription. This text reads like a construction ledger. It records the renovation and expansion of a sacred temple complex in the holy city of Nippur, dedicated to the goddess Ninlil. The inscription explicitly names Gilgamesh and his son Ur-Nungal as builders responsible for part of the structure. There is no symbolism here, no allegory, no epic language. It is the ancient equivalent of a contractor's report. This single reference grounds Gilgamesh more firmly than any myth ever could. It places him in a specific location, at a specific time, performing a mundane but verifiable act of kingship, public construction. Further traces emerge from small but telling artifacts. Cylinder seals, stone rollers used to sign documents, have been found bearing inscriptions such as "Servant of Gilgamesh." These were not ceremonial items, they were bureaucratic tools used in daily administration. You do not fabricate an entire administrative ecosystem around a fictional king. Even personal names preserve his legacy. In the generations after his reign, children were named after Gilgamesh, a common practice reserved for deified or foundational rulers. But the most overwhelming evidence is not written at all. It is built, because the city Gilgamesh ruled should not have existed in the form archaeology reveals. Uruk was not a village. It was not a gradual experiment. It was an urban explosion. At its height, Uruk covered more than 6 square kilometers and housed between 50,000 and 80,000 people, making it the largest city on Earth at the time. This level of population density had no precedent. Inside its walls, humanity crossed a threshold. Writing emerged, not for poetry, but for control. Accounting systems tracked labor and rations. Standardized bowls distributed food to workers. Bureaucracy was born, and towering over it all were massive temple complexes and monumental defensive walls, projects that required centralized authority, organized labor, and immense resources. Cities do not build themselves. Uruk demands a figure capable of commanding loyalty, fear, and obedience on an unprecedented scale, a king powerful enough to exhaust his people, a ruler strong enough to be remembered as both tyrant and legend. And this is exactly how the epic describes him. In the next part, we will step inside Uruk itself and see how the physical city mirrors the psychology of its king, and why the epic begins not with heroism, but abuse of power. The Epic of Gilgamesh does not begin with a noble king. It begins with a warning: before the flood, before the monsters, before the quest for immortality. It begins with power without restraint. Gilgamesh, at the height of his reign, is described as unmatched in strength, beauty, and authority. 2/3 divine, 1/3 mortal, he stands above every other human in Uruk. And yet, this divine inheritance does not make him wise, it makes him dangerous. The tablets tell us that Gilgamesh leaves no son to his father and no maiden to her mother. This is not poetic exaggeration. It is a description of a ruler who conscripts men into endless labor and claims women by right of power. Uruk thrives, but its people suffer. The walls rise, the temples expand, the city becomes immortal, and the king becomes unbearable. This is a crucial detail. The epic is not flattering its hero. It does not excuse him. It presents tyranny as a natural consequence of unchecked authority. Gilgamesh is civilization accelerated too quickly, structure without ethics. And the people respond in the only way they can. They pray. They cry out not to other humans, but to the gods themselves. This sets the tone for the entire epic. In the Sumerian worldview, divine intervention is not a miracle. It is governance. The gods are managers, and when a system malfunctions, they intervene. Their solution is not to destroy Gilgamesh, it is to balance him. From clay, the same substance used to create humanity, the goddess Aruru fashions a being meant to oppose the king. His name is Enkidu. Enkidu is everything Gilgamesh is not. He is born in the wild, he runs with animals, he drinks from streams, he lives without walls, laws, or hierarchy. He represents the pre-civilized human, untamed, instinctual, free. And yet, he is not idealized. Enkidu is powerful, but naive, strong, but unformed. He has no place in the city. To bring him into civilization, the gods do not use force. They use desire. A temple priestess named Shamhat is sent to him. Through intimacy, Enkidu is severed from the animal world. The beasts flee from him. His strength remains, but his innocence is gone. This moment is not romantic. It is transformative and irreversible. Enkidu gains language. He gains awareness. He gains shame. Civilization claims him. When Gilgamesh hears of this wild man who matches his strength, he does not see a friend. He sees a threat. Their first meeting is violent. The tablets describe a wrestling match so fierce it shakes the doorposts of Uruk itself. The city trembles as the two forces collide, nature and civilization, locked in struggle. And then something unexpected happens. Neither wins. Exhausted, they stop. They laugh. They embrace. In Enkidu, Gilgamesh finds something he has never known, an equal, not a subject, not a servant, a mirror. This friendship becomes the emotional core of the epic. Enkidu channels Gilgamesh's destructive energy into purpose. Together they turn outward, seeking glory, conquest, and meaning beyond the city walls. But this shift comes at a cost, because the moment Gilgamesh becomes human, the gods begin to take notice. In the next part, we will follow the two companions beyond Uruk, into forbidden territory, and see how defying the cosmic order sets in motion a punishment neither of them can escape. With Enkidu at his side, Gilgamesh no longer turns his power inward. He turns it outward, toward the unknown. The epic makes this transition clear. Once the tyrant finds an equal, the city is no longer enough. Walls and temples feel small. Authority feels hollow. Gilgamesh begins to crave something more dangerous than domination. He wants legacy. In the Sumerian world, fame is a form of immortality. To be remembered is to defy death. And the greatest way to be remembered is to confront what others fear. So Gilgamesh sets his sights on a place no human ruler should approach: the cedar forest. This forest is not simply a distant land. It is sacred territory, protected by the gods themselves. Its guardian is Humbaba, a monstrous being appointed by the god Enlil to keep humans out. Humbaba is described as terrifying, not just in strength, but in presence. His voice is thunder, his breath is fire, his face inspires paralysis. In other words, Humbaba is a boundary. He represents the line humanity is not meant to cross. Enkidu knows this. Having lived closer to the wild and the divine order, he is uneasy. He warns Gilgamesh that Humbaba is no ordinary enemy, but Gilgamesh presses forward. This is a defining moment. Gilgamesh does not attack out of necessity. He attacks to prove something. The journey to the cedar forest is long and ritualized. Along the way, Gilgamesh is plagued by prophetic dreams, visions of falling mountains, raging storms, and collapsing skies. Each dream is ominous. Each is interpreted by Enkidu as a sign of divine favor, an attempt to reassure his friend. But the dreams are ambiguous. They are not blessings. They are warnings. When the two finally confront Humbaba, the epic slows down. The encounter is tense, almost psychological. Humbaba does not immediately attack. He pleads, he offers servitude, he bargains for his life. And for a moment, Gilgamesh hesitates. This is crucial. The epic shows us that Gilgamesh understands the gravity of what he is about to do. Killing Humbaba is not heroism. It is a transgression. But Enkidu urges him on. Together, they strike. With the aid of the sun, god Shamash, who sends powerful winds to immobilize the guardian, Humbaba is defeated and beheaded. The boundary is broken. The cedar forest, once sacred, untouched, is violated. The trees are cut down. The resources are taken. Human ambition triumphs over divine restriction. At first, it feels like victory. The heroes return to Uruk in glory. Gilgamesh's fame spreads. His name echoes beyond the city walls. But the gods are not impressed. In the cosmic hierarchy, Humbaba was not a villain. He was an employee. His death is not seen as bravery. It is seen as insubordination. And this sets the stage for the next confrontation. One that will pit Gilgamesh not against a monster, but against the gods themselves. In the next part, we will see how divine pride turns to vengeance, how a rejected goddess unleashes a celestial weapon, and why the victory over Humbaba seals Enkidu's fate long before his illness begins. Triumph never lasts long in the world of the gods. When Gilgamesh returns to Uruk after slaying Humbaba, he does not come back quietly. He bathes, dresses in splendor, and parades his victory before the city. His strength is now proven. His name has crossed from fear into legend. And that is when the gaze of a goddess falls upon him. Inanna, known later as Ishtar, the goddess of love, fertility, and war, watches Gilgamesh from her temple. She is not a gentle deity. She is desire armed with violence, passion fused with destruction. When she sees Gilgamesh in his glory, she wants him, not as a lover, as a possession. She offers him power beyond kingship, wealth, divine favor, eternal fame. To accept her proposal would mean becoming something more than human, bound directly to the will of a goddess. Gilgamesh refuses, and he does so with breathtaking arrogance. He lists her former lovers one by one, reminding her how each met ruin after earning her affection. The shepherd turned into a wolf, the stallion broken by whip and spur, the gardener struck down when he displeased her. Gilgamesh understands the pattern. To love Ishtar is to be destroyed by her. His rejection is not just personal, it is political. It is a mortal king telling a goddess no. Ishtar's response is immediate and catastrophic. Humiliated and enraged, she ascends to the heavens and demands vengeance from her father, Anu, the sky god. She threatens to smash the gates of the underworld and unleash the dead upon the living if she is denied. Anu relents. He releases the bull of heaven. This creature is not symbolic. It is a celestial weapon. Wherever it steps, the earth cracks open. Entire fields collapse. Hundreds die as the land itself turns hostile. It is a reminder that the gods do not fight like humans. They reshape reality. Gilgamesh and Enkidu confront the bull together. The battle is swift and brutal. They kill the beast. And in a final act of defiance, Enkidu hurls its severed thigh at Ishtar herself, mocking her from the city walls. This moment seals their fate. The gods convene. Not all agree on punishment. Shamash, who aided the heroes, argues in their defense. But Enlil, the same god who appointed Humbaba, demands retribution. The crime is not killing monsters. It is challenging the hierarchy. One of them must die. And the gods choose Enkidu. Not because he struck the killing blow, but because he was created to balance Gilgamesh. His death will unmake that balance. Enkidu does not fall in battle. There is no glory, no final stand. He becomes ill, slowly, painfully, humanly. As his strength fades, Enkidu curses the day he left the wild, the priestess who brought him into civilization, the gods who shaped him for a role he never chose. Then, as death approaches, the curses stop. He sees a vision of the underworld, a bleak, dust-filled realm where kings and servants are equal, where crowns mean nothing and where the dead eat clay. This is not punishment, it is inevitability. When Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh does not lose a companion, he loses his reflection. And for the first time in his life, the king of Uruk understands something no power can defeat. Death is coming. In the next part, we will follow Gilgamesh as grief turns into terror and terror into obsession, launching him on a desperate journey to outrun the fate he has just witnessed. Enkidu's death does not end the epic, it detonates it. Gilgamesh does not mourn like a king. He does not retreat into ritual. He does not accept consolation. He breaks. For days he sits beside Enkidu's body, refusing to let it be buried. He watches for movement, for breath, for any sign that death can be reversed. When decay finally makes denial impossible, something inside Gilgamesh collapses. Not his power, his certainty. Until this moment, death was abstract, a problem for servants, a rumor from the underworld, something that happened to others. Now it has a face, and that face is his own. Gilgamesh tears off his royal garments and covers himself in animal skins. He abandons the city, the throne, the walls that once defined him. The king of Uruk becomes a wanderer, pacing the wilderness like a madman. His grief transforms into panic. "Shall I not die like Enkidu?" he cries. "Shall I not become dust?" This is the psychological turning point of the entire epic. Gilgamesh no longer seeks glory. He seeks escape. From this point forward, every action he takes is driven by a single obsession: to find a way around death itself. And according to the oldest memory humanity preserved, there is only one being who succeeded. A man named Utnapishtim. He is not a god. He is not a hero. He is a survivor, the only human granted immortality by the gods after the Great Flood. If anyone knows how to defeat death, it is the man who outlived the world. Gilgamesh decides to find him. This decision is irrational. No one knows where Utnapishtim lives. He is said to dwell at the mouth of the rivers, beyond the edge of the known world, across cosmic waters that no mortal may cross. But logic no longer matters. Fear has replaced reason. Gilgamesh's journey now becomes something entirely different from the heroic quests that came before. He is no longer expanding civilization. He is running from it. He travels farther than any king before him, into lands without names, across deserts where lions roam, through territories that exist somewhere between geography and myth. This is not a conquest, it is a flight. Along the way, Gilgamesh begins to resemble Enkidu more than himself. His clothes rot, his body hardens. He survives on instinct. The boundaries between king and animal blur. Civilization has failed him. The gods have betrayed him. Only survival remains. And the epic makes something very clear here. Gilgamesh is not searching for eternal life because he wants to live forever. He is searching because he cannot accept ending. In the next part, his path will take him to the edge of the world, where he will face guardians of the sun itself and be forced to race against cosmic time through absolute darkness. This is where the story stops being about kings and becomes about all of us. Gilgamesh's flight from death carries him beyond the boundaries of the human world. His destination lies past maps, past trade routes, past anything governed by kings or laws. He moves toward the place where the sun itself is born and dies each day, a realm no mortal was ever meant to enter. At the edge of the world rise the mountains of Mashu. These are not ordinary mountains. In the epic, they are described as the cosmic gates of the sun. Each morning the sun passes through them to rise into the sky. Each night it returns through the same passage, descending into darkness. Standing guard at this threshold are beings of terror, scorpion men. Their bodies reach the heavens. Their gaze brings death. Their presence marks the border between the living world and the realm beyond. When Gilgamesh approaches, they immediately sense what he is. Not fully human, not fully divine. Something unstable. The scorpion man warns him. No mortal has ever passed through the tunnel of the sun and lived. The path ahead is pure darkness, absolute, total, suffocating blackness. The sun itself takes 12 double hours to cross it. A human would be destroyed. But Gilgamesh does not turn back. He tells them the truth. His friend is dead. Death is coming for him, and he will not wait. Something about this raw desperation moves the Guardians. Perhaps it is his divine blood. Perhaps it is the universal terror they recognize in him. Whatever the reason, they open the gate. And Gilgamesh enters the path of the sun. What follows is one of the most haunting sequences in all of ancient literature. Gilgamesh runs, not walks, not explores. He runs through darkness so complete he cannot see his own hands. There are no stars, no moon, no ground beneath his feet, only forward motion and panic. Hour after hour, he pushes on. This is not a physical tunnel. It is a psychological one. The darkness represents the unknown future, the grave, the fate awaiting every human being. Gilgamesh is racing death itself, trying to outrun the night before the sun catches him inside and burns him alive. On the 12th double hour, at the final possible moment, light explodes around him. He emerges into a world that should not exist. A garden made not of plants, but of stone and gems. Trees drip with lapis lazuli. Fruits are carnelian. Leaves shimmer like metal. This is not nature. It is the frozen wealth of the earth exposed, raw and eternal. Gilgamesh has crossed into divine territory. But even here, immortality remains out of reach. On the shore of the cosmic sea, the waters of death, he encounters a figure unlike any god or monster he has faced before. A woman, Siduri. She is the tavern keeper at the edge of the world, the guardian of wisdom disguised as hospitality. When she first sees Gilgamesh, ragged, wild-eyed, dressed in skins, she bolts her door in fear. To her, he looks like a criminal, a madman, a force of chaos. Gilgamesh pleads his case. He tells her of Enkidu, of death, of his terror. And Siduri gives him the most devastating advice in the entire epic. She tells him to stop. Gilgamesh, where are you wandering? The life you seek, you will never find. She tells him the truth the gods will not. Death is humanity's inheritance. Life was never meant to be eternal. Immortality is reserved for the gods alone. And instead of offering him a path to eternal life, she offers something far more radical. Acceptance. She tells him to eat, drink, rejoice, to love his wife, to hold a child's hand, to wash, to dress well, to celebrate small moments. In other words, to live fully, not endlessly. This is the answer. And Gilgamesh cannot accept it. Not yet, because grief has made him deaf. So Siduri does what wisdom often does when it is rejected. She points him onward, toward the waters of death, toward the ferryman, toward the final lie that must be confronted before truth can be learned. In the next part, Gilgamesh will cross a sea no living being can touch, and finally stand before the man who survived the end of the world. To reach the one man who escaped death, Gilgamesh must cross a boundary no living being is meant to touch. Beyond Siduri's tavern lies the waters of death. They are not a metaphor. They are not symbolic. In the epic, they are literal. Waters so toxic that a single drop on human skin means instant annihilation. No swimming, no wading, no mistake. Waiting at the shore is Urshanabi, the ferryman of Utnapishtim. He is not a god, not a king, not a hero. He is a function. The last link between the mortal world and the realm beyond it. But Gilgamesh arrives not as a supplicant, he arrives as a storm. Still consumed by grief and fear, Gilgamesh lashes out. In a blind rage, he smashes the stone things, mysterious objects that power the ferry. The epic never fully explains what they are. Magical stabilizers, sacred talismans, mechanical devices. Whatever their nature, destroying them is catastrophic. Now the ferry cannot cross the waters safely, and Gilgamesh has just made his impossible journey even worse. Urshanabi is furious, but not surprised. Gilgamesh's violence is familiar. It is the same uncontrolled force that once terrorized Uruk. But there is no turning back now. To compensate for the destroyed stone things, Ushabti orders Gilgamesh to perform an almost absurd task. He must cut 300 punting poles, each 60 feet long. Why? Because not a single drop of the water can touch his skin. Each pole can be used only once. Push, discard, push again. 300 times. This is punishment, but also preparation. Gilgamesh spends days cutting trees, shaping poles, exhausting his body. For the first time since Enkidu's death, his energy is not driven by rage, but by discipline. When the journey begins, it is slow, silent, and terrifying. Gilgamesh stands at the bow, pushing the ferry forward one pole at a time. The water below him is death itself. One slip, one stumble, one moment of weakness, and it's over. This crossing is not heroic. It is humiliating. No battle, no glory, only careful, repetitive labor. And that is the point. When the final pole is used, the ferry reaches the far shore. And there, sitting quietly, is the man Gilgamesh has crossed the world to find. Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood, the man granted eternal life. Gilgamesh expects a towering demigod. Instead, he sees an ordinary old man, no radiance, no weapons, no divine aura, just a human who never died. This is deeply unsettling. Gilgamesh pours out his story, his grief, his terror, his desperation. He demands the secret. How did you escape death? How can I become like you? Utnapishtim listens, and then he asks a question that cuts deeper than any blade. Why are you searching for life when you cannot even master sleep? He challenges Gilgamesh to prove he is worthy of immortality, not with strength, not with courage, but with the smallest test imaginable. Stay awake. 6 days, 7 nights, no sleep. Gilgamesh agrees, and almost immediately, he falls asleep. Not gradually, not weakly, instantly. A sleep so deep it borders on death. While Gilgamesh sleeps, Utnapishtim's wife bakes a loaf of bread for each day. She places them beside the sleeping king. Fresh bread, then stale, then moldy, then hardened into stone. A visible timeline of decay. When Gilgamesh finally wakes, confident he has only just closed his eyes, the truth is undeniable. Time has passed. His body has betrayed him. He cannot conquer sleep. And if he cannot conquer sleep, he cannot conquer death. This is the moment the illusion breaks. Utnapishtim tells him the truth. Immortality was never a reward. It was an accident, a one-time exception made after the world ended. There is no ritual, no knowledge, no secret path. Gilgamesh is not special. He is human. But before sending him home in despair, Utnapishtim offers one final gift, not immortality, but delay. A plant, hidden at the bottom of the cosmic sea. A thorny herb that restores youth. It will not make Gilgamesh eternal, but it will give him more time. Hope returns. Gilgamesh ties stones to his feet and dives into the abyss. And for a moment, it seems he has won. In the next part, that hope will be taken away, not by gods, not by monsters, but by something far older, quieter, and infinitely more cruel. Gilgamesh holds the plant in his hands like a stolen miracle. It is small, unassuming, covered in thorns. Nothing about it looks powerful. And yet, this fragile thing represents everything he has lost, and everything he still fears. Utnapishtim sends him home, not triumphant, not immortal, just alive. As the journey back begins, Gilgamesh is no longer running from death. He is bargaining with it. If he cannot escape mortality, at least he can delay it. At least he can return to Uruk renewed, young again, a king restored. For the first time since Enkidu's death, his thoughts turn outward. He plans to share the plant. He imagines giving it to the elders of his city, restoring their strength. He imagines a generation reborn, time bending just enough to soften its cruelty. But fate in the Epic of Gilgamesh is never loud. It doesn't strike with thunder or fire. It waits. On the road home, Gilgamesh stops beside a pool of cool, clear water. After everything he has endured, the darkness, the waters of death, the humiliation of sleep, this moment feels harmless. He sets the plant down, just for a moment, and that is all it takes. From the water, a snake emerges, silent, unnoticed, ancient, drawn not by chance but by instinct. The snake devours the plant, and then, before Gilgamesh can react, it sheds its skin, renewed, reborn, young again. The meaning is unmistakable. Immortality, renewal, rebirth. These gifts were never meant for humanity. They belong to nature, to creatures that shed their past and continue without memory. Gilgamesh watches, and something inside him finally breaks. He sits down and weeps, not the violent rage of earlier grief, not the fear-driven panic that launched his quest. This is a quiet collapse. The understanding settles in. The gods did not trick him. The world did not cheat him. This is simply the order of things. Youth slips away. Time cannot be held. Death waits for kings and beggars alike. When Gilgamesh finally returns to Uruk, the epic ends exactly where it began, at the walls. He shows them to Urshanabi, not as a boast, but as a realization. Look at the walls of Uruk, he says. See how their foundations are laid. This is what remains. Not eternal life, not divine blood, not cosmic secrets, but work, creation, the city. Gilgamesh has learned the lesson the gods would not explain directly. Immortality does not belong to the body. It belongs to what endures beyond it. And yet, the story does not end here, because the epic contains something far more disturbing than a philosophical lesson about mortality. It contains a memory of a flood so vast that it erased the world. A memory written in clay. Long before Moses, long before Genesis, long before the Bible. In the next part, we step away from the hero and examine the event that haunts the entire epic, the flood itself, not as myth, but as testimony. The flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh is not framed like a moral parable. There is no sermon, no warning to repent, no lesson about sin. Instead, it reads like a report, cold, specific, terrifyingly restrained. When Utnapishtim begins his account, he does not speak like a prophet. He speaks like a survivor. Someone recalling something so overwhelming that emotion has been burned out of the memory, leaving only detail. The gods, he says, made a decision, not after debate, not after judgment. They were annoyed. Humanity had become too numerous, too loud, too disruptive. The noise of human life disturbed the sleep of the gods. This is not metaphorical language. In Mesopotamian theology, the gods required rest, offerings, and order. Humanity was created to provide those things. And it failed. So the solution was extermination. This alone should unsettle us. The flood was not punishment for evil. It was population control. The divine council, led by Enlil, the god of authority and command, resolved to wipe the slate clean. Every human, every city, every memory. What follows is one of the most chilling moments in ancient literature. Enki, the god of wisdom, cannot openly oppose the decision. Divine law forbids it, but he also cannot allow total annihilation. So he cheats. He does not warn Utnapishtim directly. Instead, he speaks to the walls of his house. Read wall, he whispers. Listen carefully. This detail matters. It implies rules, constraints, a system the gods themselves are bound by. Enki instructs Utnapishtim to dismantle his home and build a vessel, not a boat in the romantic sense, but a sealed survival structure. The dimensions are exact. The materials specified: bitumen for waterproofing, compartments for life. This is engineering, not myth. Utnapishtim is told to take aboard his family, craftsmen, animals, and the seed of all living things. Then the sky breaks. The epic does not describe rain, it describes terror. Storm gods unleash chaos so violent that even the gods panic. They flee upward, clustering in fear at the highest level of heaven. The same beings who ordered the destruction now recoil from it. For 6 days and 7 nights, the storm rages. Wind howls, floodwaters rise, cities dissolve. Utnapishtim looks out and sees the world turn into clay. Not bodies, not ruins. Clay. Formless, flattened, erased. This is not poetic exaggeration. In the ancient Near East, clay is what remains when structure is destroyed. Mud brick cities collapse into it. Human bodies return to it. Memory dissolves into it. When the storm ends, silence follows. The ark rests on a mountain, and then comes the test. A dove is released. It returns. A swallow is released. It returns. A raven is released, and does not come back. Life is possible again. Utnapishtim makes a sacrifice, and here the epic delivers one of its most disturbing images. The gods gather around the offering like flies, starving, desperate. The implication is unmistakable. Without humans, the gods suffer. Without sacrifices, they weaken. Humanity was not created for companionship. It was created for maintenance. When Enlil discovers that someone survived, he is furious. But Enki confronts him. Why destroy everything, Enki asks, when lesser punishments would suffice? Plague, famine, wild animals. This exchange reveals something crucial. The flood was a mistake, an overreaction, and immortality, the gift given to Utnapishtim, was not a blessing. It was compensation, a divine apology that could never be repeated. This is why Gilgamesh's quest was doomed from the start. The flood was not a cycle, it was an anomaly. And yet, this story was written down thousands of years ago, preserved with precision, copied across empires, passed from Sumer to Akkad to Babylon, because it was not a story they wanted to forget. In the next part, we ask the question that changes everything. What if this flood was not just mythological memory, but historical trauma? And what if modern science is now uncovering evidence that something very much like it actually happened? For most of modern history, the flood in the Epic of Gilgamesh was treated as mythology, borrowing from mythology. A story recycled, a legend copied, a poetic exaggeration. The assumption was simple. Ancient people told flood stories because rivers flood. End of discussion. But that explanation has quietly collapsed. Because the deeper science digs into the end of the last ice age, the more uncomfortable the coincidence becomes. Utnapishtim's flood is dated by the internal chronology of Mesopotamian tradition, to a time before recorded history, before cities, before kingship descended from heaven. A rupture between two worlds, and modern geology has now identified a rupture of exactly that scale. Around 12,900 years ago, Earth was emerging from the last ice age. Glaciers were retreating, sea levels were rising gradually, human populations were expanding, a fragile recovery was underway. Then something happened. Temperatures in the northern hemisphere dropped violently by as much as 10 to 15 degrees Celsius in less than a decade. Glaciers advanced again. Ecosystems collapsed. Entire regions became uninhabitable almost overnight. This period is known as the Younger Dryas. For decades, scientists had no explanation. Volcanoes didn't fit. Ocean currents alone weren't enough. Solar variation didn't explain the speed. Then a new hypothesis emerged, one that sounded uncomfortably close to ancient myth: the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis. According to this model, Earth passed through the debris field of a large disintegrating comet. Not a single asteroid strike, but a swarm of fragments, airbursts, explosions, continental-scale fires. The evidence is not subtle. Across North America, Europe, and parts of Asia, scientists have found a thin, dark layer in the soil dated precisely to the onset of the Younger Dryas. They call it the black mat. Inside it are markers that do not belong on Earth. Nanodiamonds, formed only under extreme heat and pressure. Magnetic spherules, microscopic droplets of melted rock. Elevated platinum and iridium, elements common in comets and asteroids. Widespread charcoal from massive wildfires. Below this layer, we find the fossils of Ice Age megafauna, mammoths, mastodons, giant ground sloths, saber-toothed cats. Above it, they are gone. At the same boundary, the Clovis culture, the dominant Paleo-Indian civilization of North America, disappears from the archaeological record. Not gradually, abruptly. This was not a local disaster. It was global, and it did not end with fire. The impacts likely melted vast portions of the Laurentide ice sheet, releasing unimaginable volumes of fresh water into the North Atlantic. This disrupted the ocean's heat circulation system, locking the planet into over 1,000 years of cold chaos. Sea levels surged, coastlines vanished, river systems rewrote themselves. If you were a human alive at that moment, especially one living near water, your world would have ended, not symbolically, literally. Now return to Utnapishtim's words. A storm so violent, the gods fled, a world flattened, humanity turned to clay, a survivor who watched it all. This does not read like a seasonal flood, it reads like catastrophe memory, and here is where the puzzle becomes impossible to ignore. Flood myths are not unique to Mesopotamia. They appear everywhere, from Noah in the Hebrew Bible, to Deucalion in Greece, to Manu in India, to Nu'u in Polynesia, to dozens of Native American traditions, different gods, different names, same event, fire from the sky, darkness, flooding, survival by preparation. This is not cultural diffusion. These cultures were separated by oceans. What they shared was experience. The Epic of Gilgamesh may not be a fairy tale. It may be the oldest surviving eyewitness account of a planetary disaster. And if that is true, then the gods of the story were not inventing destruction. They were trying to explain it. In the next part, we confront the most disturbing implication of all. If the flood was real, then the Anunnaki were not symbols. They were interpreters. And what they interpreted was a universe far more violent than we were ever taught to imagine. If the flood was real, if it was a lived event burned into human memory, then the role of the gods in the Epic of Gilgamesh must be re-examined. Because the Anunnaki do not behave like abstract symbols. They behave like administrators responding to crisis. In Mesopotamian texts, the Anunnaki are not omniscient. They argue, they disagree, they make mistakes, they panic. During the flood, they are described as terrified, huddling in the heavens while the world below is destroyed. That detail matters. A truly all-powerful, all-knowing God does not panic, but witnesses do. The Anunnaki read less like creators outside reality, and more like beings inside a system they do not fully control. They respond to cosmic forces rather than command them. The flood is not portrayed as elegant judgment. It is messy, excessive, and regretted. Which raises a dangerous question. What if the gods were not causing the catastrophe, but reacting to it? In this interpretation, the Anunnaki become mediators between humanity and a hostile cosmos, interpreters of celestial violence. Beings who tried, sometimes clumsily, to manage the aftermath of events far larger than themselves. This reframes everything. The flood is no longer divine punishment. It is disaster management. Utnapishtim was not chosen because he was righteous. He was chosen because he could prepare. Enki's warning is not a moral reward. It is a contingency protocol. And immortality is not a blessing. It is an administrative exception, a way to preserve a living memory of what happened. This would explain why the gods forbid future floods, not because they learned compassion, but because they learned restraint. They saw what total erasure did. They saw the consequences. This perspective also sheds new light on a haunting feature of the Sumerian king list. Before the flood, kings rule for tens of thousands of years. After the flood, reigns collapse into human-scale lifespans. Most scholars dismiss this as myth, but what if it reflects something else? A break in continuity, a loss of knowledge, a collapse in longevity. Biological, cultural, or technological. What if long reigns do not refer to age at all, but to epochs preserved by a stable system that no longer existed after the catastrophe? In this view, the flood marks not just environmental collapse, but civilizational amnesia, a reset. And this is where the story turns unsettling. Because the Epic of Gilgamesh is not obsessed with gods. It is obsessed with what was lost. Lost cities, lost knowledge, lost certainty, lost time. Gilgamesh's entire journey mirrors humanity's trauma. He begins as a ruler of a functioning world. He loses his counterpart. He witnesses death firsthand. He searches desperately for survivors of the previous age. He fails to reclaim what was lost. And finally, he accepts limitation. This is not heroic fantasy. It is psychological processing. The epic reads like a civilization trying to understand why the world became fragile, why death became final, why the gods withdrew, and why humanity was left alone inside time. In the next part, we move from myth and trauma to astronomy, toward the name that has come to dominate modern imagination, Nibiru, not as a rogue planet of conspiracy, but as it originally appeared to the ancient skywatchers, a crossing point, a marker of cosmic danger, and possibly a warning written in the stars. Long before Nibiru became a modern obsession, it was something far more subtle and far more important. It was not a planet of doom. It was a warning system. In the original Mesopotamian texts, Nibiru is not described as a wandering destroyer crashing through the solar system. The word itself, in Akkadian, means crossing or place of transition. Nibiru was not an object in isolation. It was a marker. The key text for understanding this is the Enuma Elish, the Babylonian creation epic. In this story, the god Marduk rises to supreme authority after defeating the primordial chaos embodied by Tiamat. His victory is not just military, it is organizational. Marduk's true achievement is order. He arranges the stars. He fixes the paths of the planets. He establishes the calendar. And then, crucially, he establishes Nibiru. The text states that Marduk set Nibiru in the heavens to hold the celestial crossings so that none might transgress their paths. This is not the language of a planet. It is the language of navigation. Nibiru functioned as a reference point in the sky, a fixed position against which movement was measured. It was the cosmic equivalent of a lighthouse, a stabilizer, a checkpoint. To the Babylonian astronomer priests, the heavens were not symbolic decorations. They were a machine, a clock, a system whose precision determined survival on Earth. Planting seasons, flood cycles, religious festivals, omens of disaster, all depended on accurate celestial tracking. Nibiru marked the crossroads, the place where celestial paths intersected and where deviations would be noticed. In some periods, Nibiru appears to have been associated with Jupiter, the largest and most regal of the planets. This makes sense. Jupiter dominates the sky. Its slow, predictable motion made it an ideal symbol of cosmic authority, fitting for Marduk, king of the gods. In other contexts, Nibiru is associated not with a planet at all, but with a specific point on the ecliptic, the path the sun follows through the sky. Some texts link it to the position of the sun at the summer solstice, the moment when solar power reaches its peak. This matters, because solstices are not mythological dates. They are astronomical control points. They allow a civilization to detect long-term shifts in Earth's orientation, climate patterns, and celestial mechanics. They are how ancient astronomers noticed precession, the slow wobble of Earth's axis over a 25,920-year cycle. That number should sound familiar. It appears again and again in ancient systems. Sumerian mathematics, Egyptian cosmology, later Greek astronomy. These cultures were not guessing, they were measuring. So when the Mesopotamians spoke of Nibiru holding the paths, they were expressing a profound anxiety, the fear that the heavens could go wrong, that the sky could misbehave, that order could collapse. And if Part 12 suggested that the flood was a reaction to cosmic disaster, then Nibiru begins to look less like a cause and more like a memory of detection, a signpost marking the danger zone, a place in the sky where ancient observers believed catastrophe could be anticipated. This interpretation radically changes the meaning of later myths. Nibiru was not the destroyer, it was the alarm, and like all alarms, its meaning was lost when the original system that understood it collapsed. In the next part, we will see how this precise astronomical concept was transformed, centuries later, into something far more literal, far more sensational, and far more dangerous. Because once Nibiru was forgotten as a marker, it was reborn as a planet, and that transformation reshaped modern conspiracy culture forever. The transformation of Nibiru from a celestial marker into a literal world-destroying planet did not happen in ancient times. It happened in the 20th century, and it began with a single man. In 1976, a book appeared that would permanently alter how millions of people interpreted ancient history. The 12th Planet by Zecharia Sitchin. Sitchin was not an archaeologist by training, nor an academic Assyriologist. He was an independent researcher, self-taught, confident, and convinced that mainstream scholarship had missed something enormous. His claim was radical. The ancient Sumerians, he argued, knew about an additional planet in our solar system, and they recorded it. According to Sitchin, Nibiru was not a symbolic crossing point or astronomical reference. It was a massive physical planet, 4 times the size of Earth, on a highly elongated orbit that takes 3,600 years to complete. Every 3,600 years, he claimed, this planet passes through the inner solar system, and when it does, catastrophe follows. Sitchin's argument rested on 3 main pillars. First, he reinterpreted Sumerian mathematical language. The number 3,600, called a shah, was, in his view, not just a counting unit, but a time cycle tied to Nibiru's orbit. Second, he reinterpreted ancient artwork. Certain cylinder seals showing circles around a central object were described not as symbolic stars, but as a literal map of the solar system, with 1 extra body included. Third, and most dramatically, he reinterpreted the Anunnaki. In Sitchin's version, they were not gods at all. They were extraterrestrials, beings from Nibiru who arrived on Earth hundreds of thousands of years ago in search of gold. Their home planet, he claimed, had a failing atmosphere, and gold was needed to stabilize it. When mining proved too difficult, the Anunnaki allegedly engineered humanity, genetically modifying early hominins to create a hybrid labor force. The biblical creation story, the Nephilim, the flood, the gods of myth, all according to Sitchin were garbled memories of this ancient extraterrestrial intervention. It was a breathtaking narrative, elegant, comprehensive, and completely outside academic consensus. Mainstream scholars rejected it immediately. They pointed out that Sitchin's translations of Sumerian and Akkadian texts did not align with established grammar or context. Astronomers noted that a planet of the proposed size and orbit would cause massive, detectable gravitational disruptions, none of which have ever been observed. And yet, the theory spread. Because Sitchin wasn't offering footnotes, he was offering meaning. His story explained why civilizations seemed to appear suddenly in Sumer, why humans felt unfinished, why ancient texts described gods who demanded labor, why catastrophe haunted our oldest myths. It gave people a narrative where humanity mattered, not as an accident, but as a project. Nibiru became more than a planet. It became a symbol of hidden truth, of suppressed knowledge, of elites who knew more than they admitted. And once that idea took root, it detached from Sitchin's own timeline and logic. Nibiru was no longer bound to 3,600 years. It could arrive any time, and that fear would eventually converge with another ancient calendar, one from the jungles of Mesoamerica. In the next part, we arrive at the moment when ancient myth, modern anxiety, and digital amplification collided. The year 2012, and the return of Nibiru. As the idea of Nibiru spread, it began to mutate. By the early 2000s, it was no longer just a theory discussed in fringe books and late-night radio shows. It had found a new amplifier, the internet. Forums, blogs, and early video platforms transformed Nibiru from a speculative hypothesis into a countdown. The original structure of Sitchin's work, its dates, its internal logic, even its contradictions, were stripped away. What remained was the most contagious element of all, an approaching catastrophe that they didn't want you to know about. And then another ancient system entered the picture. The Maya long count calendar. In December 2012, the long count completed a full cycle known as a baktun, a rollover, not an ending. To Maya scholars, this was no more apocalyptic than a calendar flipping from December 31st to January 1st. But to a public already primed for hidden planets and suppressed knowledge, the coincidence was irresistible. Two unrelated ideas fused into one: the end of the calendar, the return of Nibiru. The result was a perfect modern myth. Websites claimed that Nibiru would collide with Earth on December 21st, 2012. Others suggested a near pass that would trigger pole shifts, mega earthquakes, volcanic chains, or tsunamis hundreds of meters high. The narrative grew darker. Governments knew. NASA was hiding the truth. Telescopes were being shut down. Underground bunkers were being built for the elite. Every comet became Nibiru. Every lens flare became proof. Every denial became confirmation of a cover-up. What made the 2012 panic unique was scale. This was not a localized cult belief. It was global. Schools received letters from frightened parents. Hotlines were flooded with calls. Children wrote emails asking scientists if the world was going to end. For the first time in modern history, a space agency was forced to directly respond to a prophecy. NASA broke precedent. They issued public statements, hosted Q&A sessions, and released detailed explanations dismantling every claim, explaining orbital mechanics, gravitational perturbations, infrared sky surveys, and why a planet capable of destroying Earth could not possibly be hidden. Their argument was simple. If Nibiru existed, it would already be visible. Its gravity would have disrupted planetary orbits. Thousands of amateur astronomers would have detected it independently. None had. December 21st, 2012 arrived. And nothing happened. No impact, no pole shift, no apocalypse. But the myth did not die. It adapted. Believers claimed the date was miscalculated, or that benevolent beings intervened, or that the catastrophe was spiritual, not physical. The prophecy failed, but the idea survived. Nibiru had become untethered from time. It no longer needed to arrive. It only needed to almost arrive. And beneath the spectacle of fear and misinformation, something deeper was happening. Because while Nibiru itself may not be real, the human obsession with cosmic destruction is. And science, quietly and without drama, was uncovering evidence that the Earth had indeed been struck by something catastrophic at the dawn of civilization. Not in the future, but in the past. In the next part, we leave conspiracy behind and enter the geological record. A 13,000-year-old scar, and the evidence of a real cosmic disaster that changed everything. When the noise of prophecy fades, what remains is evidence. And buried deep within Earth's geological memory is a layer that does not care about belief systems, ancient texts, or internet myths. It exists whether we acknowledge it or not. This layer is known simply as the Younger Dryas boundary. Around 12,800 years ago, the planet was emerging from the last ice age. Massive glaciers were retreating. sea levels were rising, and ecosystems were stabilizing. Then, abruptly, within what appears to be a single human lifetime, the climate snapped back into near-glacial conditions. Temperatures in parts of the northern hemisphere dropped by as much as 10 to 15 degrees Celsius in a matter of years. Not centuries, not millennia, years. For over 1,200 years, the Earth remained locked in this sudden cold phase before warming just as violently as it had cooled. For decades, this made no sense. Volcanoes couldn't explain it. Solar variation wasn't enough. Ocean circulation models failed to account for the speed and severity of the change. Then researchers began finding something strange. Across North America, Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia, scientists discovered a thin, dark sediment layer dating precisely to the onset of the Younger Dryas. This layer, often called the black mat, was unlike anything above or below it. Inside, it were microscopic signatures of catastrophe. Nanodiamonds formed only under extreme pressure and temperature. Magnetic spherules created by vaporized rock platinum and iridium anomalies, rare on Earth but common in space. Widespread charcoal from continent-scale wildfires. These were not the fingerprints of gradual climate change. They were the fingerprints of impact. The Younger Dryas impact hypothesis proposes that Earth passed through the fragmented remains of a massive comet, possibly part of the Taurid meteor stream. Instead of one single asteroid strike, the planet was subjected to a barrage of airbursts and impacts across vast regions. The result would have been apocalyptic. Firestorms ignited instantly. Shockwaves flattened forests. Ice sheets flash melted. Megafloods surged across continents. The sudden influx of fresh water into the North Atlantic disrupted the ocean's thermohaline circulation, the planetary conveyor belt that distributes heat. The climate collapsed into chaos, and with it, so did life. At the Younger Dryas boundary, over 70% of North America's megafauna vanished from the fossil record almost overnight. Mammoths, mastodons, saber-toothed cats, giant ground sloths. At the same time, the Clovis culture, one of the earliest widespread human cultures in the Americas, disappears. Above the black mat, they are gone. Below it, they are everywhere. This was not a slow decline, it was an abrupt termination. And this is where myth and geology begin to overlap in uncomfortable ways. Because nearly every ancient civilization carries a memory of fire from the sky, of floods, of a world destroyed and remade. Not metaphorically, viscerally. The Mesopotamian flood of Utnapishtim, the biblical flood of Noah, the Greek flood of Deucalion, the Hindu flood of Manu. The Hopi stories of previous worlds destroyed, the Maya accounts of suns that ended in fire. For centuries, these stories were dismissed as allegory. But what if they are witness accounts? What if the survivors of a real cosmic disaster carried those memories forward, not as data, but as myth? This reframes everything. Nibiru no longer needs to be a rogue planet. The Anunnaki no longer need to be aliens. The gods descending in fire may simply be humanity's first attempt to explain the sky turning hostile. And the flood, the great reset found everywhere, may not be divine punishment at all. It may be impact aftermath. A comet storm that scarred the Earth so deeply it reset the human story. If that is true, then civilizations like Sumer were not humanity's first attempt at order. They were a reconstruction, a reboot. And the Epic of Gilgamesh, with its obsession with the flood, immortality, and lost knowledge, stops being myth. It becomes memory. In the next part, we confront the most unsettling question of all. If humanity survived a global catastrophe once and rebuilt from fragments, what exactly was lost? If the ancients were trying to warn us, then the final question is not what they knew, it is why we forgot. Because forgetting is not just the result of catastrophe, it is also the result of success. When a civilization stabilizes, it no longer looks backward. It builds forward. It writes new histories. It tells itself a story of continuous progress. And inconvenient memories of collapse, of failure, of worlds lost, become myths, then superstitions, then embarrassments. Modern civilization has done exactly this. We tell ourselves that history is a straight ascent, that technology only moves in one direction, that knowledge, once discovered, cannot be undiscovered. But Göbekli Tepe stands as a contradiction carved in limestone. It tells us that complexity can appear suddenly, that knowledge can be inherited rather than invented, and that entire systems of understanding can vanish without leaving textbooks behind. We assume that if a civilization were advanced, it would leave behind metal, machines, and cities of concrete and steel. But advanced does not mean industrial. A society can be astronomically sophisticated, mathematically precise, socially organized, and spiritually driven without fossil fuels, electricity, or silicon chips. If such a civilization collapsed, its most important technologies would not rust. They would disappear. The ocean would take the ports. Erosion would erase roads. Organic materials would rot. What would remain are only the hardest things to destroy: stone, geometry, myth. This reframes the ancient world in a disturbing way. The pyramids, the megaliths, the impossible stonework. These may not be the beginnings of knowledge. They may be the end of it. Final expressions of mastery before forgetting set in. In this light, the Anunnaki are no longer extraterrestrial overlords or literal gods. They are symbolic. They represent a remembered hierarchy of knowledge. Those who knew versus those who did not. Those who planned versus those who survived. The language of gods, floods, and divine punishment becomes a cultural shorthand for forces too vast to fully explain. And Nibiru, stripped of modern conspiracy, is no longer a rogue planet. It is the idea of cosmic vulnerability, the ancient understanding that Earth exists in a dynamic, dangerous universe, that the sky is not static, that catastrophe is not hypothetical. The Mesopotamians encoded this understanding into their cosmology. The Mayans encoded it into their calendars. The Egyptians encoded it into their star alignments. Different languages, same message. Cycles exist. And no civilization escapes them forever. What makes our moment unique is not our technology. It is our awareness. For the first time, we can see the scars. We can measure impact proxies. We can map submerged coastlines. We can reconstruct ancient skies with software. We are rediscovering what the ancients already feared. And yet, unlike them, we have built a civilization dependent on systems that assume stability. Global supply chains, electric grids, satellites, just-in-time everything, a single solar storm, a modest asteroid, a climate cascade, and the lights go out. If history is cyclical, then the question is not whether collapse will happen. It is whether this time memory survives. Göbekli Tepe was buried intentionally, not destroyed, preserved. A time capsule for a future that had not yet arrived. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the ancient world is not how to build, but how to leave a message behind. Because if humanity rises again after us, stone will speak. And they will ask the same question we are asking now. Who were they? And why did they disappear? Every civilization eventually asks the same question, not at its beginning, but at its end. What will remain of us? When the people of the ancient world carved their stories into stone and pressed their memories into clay, they were not trying to impress the future. They were trying to survive it. Göbekli Tepe was not built for comfort. The Epic of Gilgamesh was not written for entertainment. The flood myths were not created to frighten children. They were built, written, and remembered because something had already gone terribly wrong. A world had ended, and those who lived through it understood a truth we prefer to ignore. Civilization is not permanent. Knowledge is not guaranteed. Progress is not irreversible. What survives is not power, but intention. The ancients did not leave us machines. They left questions. They left us impossible structures that force us to reconsider timelines. They left myths that refuse to stay buried. They left alignments that only make sense if someone was watching the sky for thousands of years. And most importantly, they left us a warning wrapped in story. That the greatest danger does not come from ignorance. It comes from forgetting. Gilgamesh returns to Uruk without immortality, but with understanding. Utnapishtim survives the flood, but cannot save the world. The gods themselves panic when the storm arrives. There are no saviors in this story, only witnesses. And perhaps that is the final lesson. We are not meant to escape the cycle. We are meant to remember it, because memory is the only technology that can outlast collapse. Stone can crumble, cities can sink, languages can die, but stories, if told well enough, can cross millennia. Right now, we stand where Gilgamesh once stood, surrounded by walls we believe will last forever, protected by systems we assume will never fail, confident that our knowledge cannot be lost. History suggests otherwise. If a future civilization uncovers the remains of our world, they may not find our data centers or satellites. They will find foundations, strange alignments, fragments of myth, and they will debate who we were, whether we were primitive, whether we were advanced, whether we knew what was coming. The answer will not be found in our technology, it will be found in what we chose to preserve. The ancients buried their warning in stone. We have heard it. The question now is whether we will pass it on, or become just another chapter in the long, forgotten cycle of human rise and collapse.